As an artist, I just can't think of a better life than the one that I've been blessed with. It's just a great ride, with many wonderful relationships and experiences along the way. And it's a ride I hope to continue.
When the news broke on September 16, 2025, the world stood still. Robert Redford, the legendary actor, director, and activist, was gone at 89. He died quietly, in his sleep, at his home in Sundance, Utah. But behind that peaceful ending lay a lifetime of triumphs, heartbreaks, and private battles that shaped one of the greatest Hollywood icons of all time. To millions, Redford was the golden face of American cinema, the outlaw who rode alongside Paul Newman, the charming con man, the quiet revolutionary behind the Sundance Film Festival. Yet away from the screen, his life was filled with struggles far removed from the glamour. He endured devastating losses, fought for causes bigger than himself, and spent his final years retreating into the quiet of the mountains he loved. What happened in those final days, and the shocking truth about the tragedies that haunted him until the very end, will change the way you remember Robert Redford forever. Long before Hollywood fame, Robert Redford's life was shaped by loss. Born in 1936 in Santa Monica, California, he grew up in a modest household, far from the glamour of the screen. His father worked as a milkman, and his mother Martha was his anchor, gentle, supportive, and the one who encouraged his artistic side. But tragedy struck early. When Robert was just 18, his mother died suddenly at only 41 years old, leaving him devastated. It was a wound he carried for the rest of his life, often saying that she was the one person who believed in his dreams before anyone else. As a young man, Redford struggled to find direction. He lost interest in school, drifted through jobs, and even battled with alcohol in his early 20s. At one point, he admitted to being a lost kid, unsure if he'd ever escape the cycle of disappointment and grief. But it was art that gave him an outlet. He studied painting in Europe, searching for purpose, before returning to the United States, where acting unexpectedly became his path forward. Even as success came later, tragedy continued to follow him. In 1959, Robert and his first wife Lola welcomed their first child, a son named Scott. But just months later, Scott died suddenly from crib death. The pain of losing his baby boy left Redford and his wife shattered. Decades later, he admitted that he rarely spoke of it because the grief was too heavy to carry publicly. These early tragedies, his mother's death, his struggles as a young man, and the unbearable loss of his first son, shaped the man Robert would become. They hardened him in some ways, but they also gave him a deeper empathy, a sensitivity that audiences would later see reflected in his performances. Behind every charming smile on screen, there was a man who knew the cost of sorrow, and it was that combination of resilience and vulnerability that carried him into the spotlight, where the world would soon meet the Robert Redford destined to become a star. Stay with me, because what happened next changed Redford's life forever, and don't forget to subscribe so you won't miss it. By the 1960s, Robert Redford had found his way onto the stage and into television, but it wasn't long before Hollywood recognized something special in him. He had the kind of looks that fit perfectly into the golden age of American cinema. Sharp, charismatic, and effortlessly charming. But it was his intensity, the depth behind his eyes, that set him apart from just another handsome face in Hollywood. His big break came on Broadway in Barefoot in the Park, 1963, a light-hearted comedy that revealed his natural charm and quick timing. Hollywood quickly came calling, and by the end of the decade, Redford was everywhere. His career skyrocketed with films like Inside Daisy Clover and The Chase, where he began to show audiences he could balance both vulnerability and strength. But the true turning point was 1969's Butch Cassidy and the Sundance Kid. Paired with Paul Newman, Redford created one of cinema's most beloved duos. The film was a sensation, and the role of the Sundance Kid forever linked his name with outlaws, adventure, and rebellious charm. From that moment, Robert Redford wasn't just an actor, he was an icon. The hits kept coming. In the 1970s, he headlined classics like The Sting, The Way We Were, All the President's Men, and 3 Days of the Condor. Each performance showed a different side of him: the playful con man, the romantic lead, the serious political thinker. By the middle of the decade, Redford had become the highest-grossing star in the world. He wasn't just popular, he was shaping the identity of American cinema itself. What made him different was the subtlety he brought to every role. He didn't have to shout or exaggerate. His power came through quiet moments, a glance, a pause, the weight of silence, and audiences trusted him, whether he was playing a hero, a lover, or a man caught in a web of corruption. But Redford wasn't content to just be the face on the poster. Behind the fame, he was already dreaming of something more, a chance to use his success to tell the kinds of stories Hollywood often ignored. And soon, he would step behind the camera to begin building a legacy even greater than his stardom. By the late 1970s, Robert Redford had already conquered Hollywood as an actor, but his ambitions stretched far beyond the screen. He wasn't satisfied with just starring in blockbuster hits. He wanted to shape the kinds of stories being told, and that desire led him behind the camera. In 1980, Redford directed his first film, Ordinary People. Few expected the golden boy of Hollywood to succeed as a director, but the results stunned critics and audiences alike. The film won 4 Academy Awards, including Best Picture and Best Director for Redford himself. Overnight, he went from movie star to visionary filmmaker, proving he had both the talent and the courage to tell complex, deeply human stories. But his greatest contribution to cinema wasn't just one film. It was the creation of the Sundance Institute and the Sundance Film Festival. In the early 1980s, Redford purchased land in Utah, where he had long retreated for peace. There, he built a space dedicated to nurturing independent filmmakers, artists who couldn't find a voice in Hollywood's commercial machine. Sundance grew from a small gathering into the most important festival for independent film in the world, launching the careers of directors like Quentin Tarantino, Steven Soderbergh, and Darren Aronofsky. Through Sundance, Redford changed the industry forever. He gave space for new voices, for daring ideas, for films that challenged rather than conformed. He became not just a star, but a guardian of storytelling itself. Outside of film, Redford was equally committed to activism. He was an outspoken environmentalist, using his fame to fight for the protection of nature and to raise awareness about climate change long before it became a global conversation. He campaigned for clean air, clean water, and wildlife preservation, never afraid to clash with politicians or corporations. To him, the fight for the planet was as important as any role he ever played. By the 1990s and 2000s, Redford had become something more than an actor or director. He was an institution, a man who could dominate the box office, inspire new generations of filmmakers, and stand as a moral voice in an industry that often lost its way. But even as he built his legacy, the shadows of personal pain followed him. Because while the world saw the legend, behind closed doors, Redford was enduring losses that no fame or success could erase. For all the glamour of Hollywood, Robert Redford's private life was marked by heartbreak. Behind the red carpets and award shows, he carried grief that never truly left him. The first tragedy came early in his marriage to Lola Van Wagenen. In 1959, their first child, a baby boy named Scott, died of sudden infant death syndrome. Redford rarely spoke of it publicly, but in rare interviews he admitted that the loss left him and Lola shattered. No amount of fame or success could ever erase that wound. Later, as his career soared, Redford faced another devastating blow. His third child, James, known as Jamie, grew up to be a talented filmmaker and activist, following in his father's footsteps. But in 2020, Jamie died from complications due to liver cancer at just 58 years old. For Robert, it was more than the loss of a son. It was the loss of a creative partner, someone who shared his passion for storytelling and activism. The grief of outliving 2 of his children weighed heavily on him in his later years. Beyond the tragedies with his children, Redford also endured the collapse of his first marriage. Though he and Lola shared 4 children, the constant pressure of fame, travel, and personal challenges led to divorce in 1985. It was a painful ending to a relationship that had begun before he was a star. Even after remarrying in 2009 to Sibylle Sagers, a German painter who became his lifelong companion, Redford admitted that he carried the weight of his earlier losses with him. Friends described him as warm but private, always careful about revealing too much. The world saw his charisma, but his close circle knew he was a man shaped by both triumph and tragedy. These private sorrows influenced the way he approached his work. Many of his films, whether as an actor or director, carried themes of loss, resilience, and the search for meaning. Audiences may not have realized it, but much of Redford's art came directly from the pain he lived with off-screen. By the time he reached his later years, Redford's life had been a balancing act, the public image of a Hollywood legend, and the private reality of a man who had endured some of the deepest wounds imaginable. And those years of quiet struggle would ultimately lead him toward a slower, more secluded life in the mountains of Utah, where he prepared for his final chapter. As the years went on, Robert Redford slowly stepped away from the spotlight that had defined him for so long. By the late 2010s, he announced his retirement from acting, explaining that he wanted to spend more time with his family and focus on the parts of life that had nothing to do with fame. Hollywood was stunned, but Redford knew he had already given the world more than enough. He moved most of his life to the mountains of Utah, where he had long kept a retreat. There, surrounded by the wilderness he loved, he lived quietly with his wife Sybil. For a man who once commanded global attention, Redford seemed most at peace in the silence of nature, painting, walking through the forests, and dedicating himself to environmental causes. Those close to him say that he found more joy in the simple rhythms of the countryside than in any Hollywood gala. In these later years, his health began to decline. Though details were kept private, he dealt with the natural toll of age and the weight of decades of personal tragedy. Friends described him as fragile at times, but always dignified, never losing the calm authority that made him a presence both on and off the screen. The death of his son Jamie in 2020 marked one of the hardest chapters of his later life, and those who visited him noticed how deeply it had changed him. Still, he carried himself with quiet strength, leaning on his family and finding solace in the work he had already left behind. On September 16, 2025, Redford's remarkable journey came to an end. He died peacefully in his sleep at his Sundance home, surrounded by family. There were no dramatic headlines, no scandal, just a quiet farewell for a man who had lived a life of extraordinary highs and heartbreaking lows. When the news broke, the world mourned. Colleagues, friends, and fans poured out tributes. Meryl Streep called him a guiding light. Jane Fonda described him as a true partner and friend. Across social media, from veteran actors to young filmmakers, the same message echoed. Robert Redford wasn't just a star. He was a giant whose influence would never fade. But that wasn't the end of his story, because as tributes poured in, people began to reflect not only on his passing, but on the immense legacy he left behind. And that legacy, both in cinema and beyond, will outlive us all. When the world said goodbye to Robert Redford, it wasn't just mourning the loss of a Hollywood legend. It was reflecting on how deeply he had shaped the very soul of cinema. His career wasn't built on one genre or one decade. It spanned generations, shifting seamlessly from golden boy heartthrob to serious actor, then to visionary director and activist. Few in Hollywood have ever worn so many hats, and fewer still wore them with such grace. As an actor, Redford's work became the definition of American storytelling. Butch Cassidy and the Sundance Kid, The Sting, All the President's Men, The Way We Were. These films weren't just hits. They were cultural markers that defined eras. His quiet intensity and magnetic presence gave audiences heroes who felt real, flawed, and human. In a time when Hollywood often preferred spectacle, Redford's strength was subtlety. But his greatest gift to film may have been Sundance. By founding the Sundance Institute and Festival, he gave a voice to filmmakers who would have otherwise been ignored. It was through Sundance that talents like Quentin Tarantino, Steven Soderbergh, and Damien Chazelle found their stage. In championing independent cinema, Redford didn't just create opportunities, he redefined the industry, proving that powerful stories could come from anywhere, not just the Hollywood machine. Beyond the camera, his legacy stretched into activism. He spoke fearlessly about the environment, decades before climate change became mainstream conversation. He supported social causes, lending his voice to movements that demanded change. He understood that fame wasn't just a platform for self-promotion. It was a responsibility. And yet, for all his achievements, Redford remained humble. He often shied away from interviews, kept his private life guarded, and resisted the cult of celebrity. To him, it was always about the work, the message, and the impact. That's why his passing hit so hard. Robert Redford wasn't just another movie star. He was a symbol of integrity in an industry that so often loses its way. His films, his festival, and his activism continue to inspire, reminding us that art can entertain, but it can also heal, challenge, and change the world. Robert Redford's story was never just about Hollywood. It was about resilience in the face of loss, about using success to lift others up, and about staying true to himself even when the world tried to turn him into something else. He was the outlaw who made us cheer, the director who made us think, and the activist who reminded us that art and responsibility can walk hand in hand. Even in his final days, living quietly among the mountains of Utah, Redford carried with him the weight of tragedies, and the pride of achievements that shaped not only his own life, but the lives of countless others. His death may have closed a chapter, but his legacy is still alive every time an independent filmmaker gets their first chance, every time an audience revisits The Sting or Butch Cassidy, and every time someone finds inspiration in his fight for the planet. Legends like Robert Redford don't really leave us. They live on in the stories, the images and the ideals they gave the world. And for generations to come, his name will still mean more than just cinema. It will mean courage, integrity, and vision. If his story moved you, make sure to subscribe, because there are many more untold journeys of legends like Redford that you won't want to miss.